Um, Welcome to session number 4. We are going fast here. We discussed drum programming last month. Before that, we talked a little bit about sound design and kind of a sound practice and how you can sort of develop a little bit of a routine in your music making that will sort of generate more ideas. And in the very first session, we talked a little bit about arrangements and about how to sort of build a sort of quick loop and sort of turn that into a rough sketch. Today, I think I did warn you that I like talking about arrangements all the time. And so today we will once again be revisiting this subject. But we will go a little bit deeper. If you remember that very first session, we listened to a few classic tracks and sort of try to analyze its arrangements. And we also sort of built a little loop. I used that Vancouver track as an example and sort of turned that little loop into a sketch. And so today I wanted to kind of pick up from there and sort of talk through the sort of development of a track, how you sort of like expand an arrangement from just a blatant sketch into a fully fledged track. You know, I was sort of thinking about how to illustrate that best, and I didn't want to pick other people's music for it, so I decided to just pick one of my older tracks, and we'll just do like a track walkthrough from beginning to end. Some of the tracks that I made, I deleted everything because I never wanted to have anything to do with this track anymore. But this one in particular, I still had a few earlier versions, so we can actually sort of look back. Another thing that I wanted to emphasize is that obviously, you know, the sort of the Pearson sounds and Veracos of this world don't just wake up in the morning and, you know, by divine intervention get a magic idea and bust out a track in an hour. Those perfect tracks hardly ever happen. Most tracks are, you know, pure pain to make. And so I also wanted to show you, you know, what that is like, because I feel like the sort of more realistic way of looking at, you know, how tracks are made means that you also have to look at all the stuff that goes wrong when you're making a track. And so we're going to go through the pain and into bliss at the end of the session. So if you are ready for pain, then let's go and get started. So this track, I don't quite remember the title, 'cause I always forget titles, but a while back, you know, 2018, 2017 kind of time, I was experimenting a little bit with one of those sort of sample folders with a load of drums in it. I think I went through like 200 grime tracks and sort of took out every single kick drum and snare and hi-hat just to sort of get that sort of grime feel. And so I thought, you know, I'd make like a little pack out of that and sort of see if I can experiment with some of those drums and sort of get an idea going, right? And so the idea that I had was something like this, a little loop, very similar to that Vancouver loop that we looked at way back when in session number 1. And so, like I said, you know, this is very much inspired by these sort of older grime tracks. And so I figured I sort of start with some sort of just, you know, 140 BPM-ish sort of half-step beat. And so what happened was this idea. So just very, very simple half-step beat and this sort of big sort of pad that I found. And then the idea was basically that this would be some sort of intro, and then after a while the pads would drop out and there would be this sort of nasty bass line, and that would sound something like this. sound is a bit quiet. Wait.
I think a bit loud is what he said.
Oh, the sound is loud, but my voice is quiet. What about now? Is my voice louder now? Okay. So okay, cool. All right. So this loop, basically very, very rough beat, some pads, and then that bass line, right? So the beats sound like this. Pads. And then that bass line. Very, very simple idea. And so, usually I spend maybe 45 minutes to an hour on a little loop like that. And once I sort of start sort of like auditioning the loop and muting and soloing elements, that's kind of like you're almost building an arrangement in your mind already, right? And as soon as you feel like you start to do that, then it's a good time to build it into rough sketch and sort of drag out that basic idea. And like I said before, like when I heard those pads, I was like, okay, those pads could be like a little intro, and then you have a bass drop. Maybe those pads come back a little bit later or in an alternate form, etc., etc. So you start to sort of like think about how you can sort of tell the story of the loop, right? And so with this particular loop, I only spent a little bit of time, and then I dragged it out into this basic arrangement, or rough sketch if you want to call it that, where I added a few more sort of percussive elements like this. These are just loops that I had lying around from an older track. I usually use those as placeholders. And so I'll play you a little bit of the track and then of the rough sketch, and then we'll sort of talk a little bit more. And that was the end of the sketch. As you can hear, very bare bones, right? It's literally just, channels on and off, basically. No transitions, no automation, not even any fancy mixing or sound design or anything like that. Just very, very simple storytelling, right? Just sort of getting the pacing right of how long should the intro be, how long should the main section be, when should those pads come back, etc. And so this is usually what sort of rough sketches look like for me. Usually in my mind, I imagine all sorts of cool stuff happening over the top, but just things that I usually start to build much, much later in the process. But to at least sort of get the pacing and the main idea of the track down is important. And so I bounced this particular idea, a good 2.5, 3 minutes. And then usually what I do is it just lives on my hard drive for a little while. And I sort of once every while revisited it, listen to the track, and sort of see if it's still something that appeals to me. And so that happened to this track as well. And it was sort of sitting there on my desktop and sitting a little bit more and then a little bit more. And then I revisited it a couple times to see if I could add things, but somehow I could never get past that sort of dreaded 3-minute mark where you feel like, oh, you need to add something major to make it interesting, or, maybe, this. It happens all the time. Like usually around that sort of 2.5 minute, if you have a really, really basic idea, then usually you're kind of done storytelling after 3 minutes. And unless the idea is really, really good, it's very hard to finish something and keep it interesting, right? And so that happened to this idea. Sometimes when I'm sort of stuck with tracks like that, I bounce the separate stems and I throw them in my live set. And then when I'm sort of playing live, I throw in a stem here or there, like the beat or just the bass line or something. And sometimes because other stuff is playing at the same time, it sort of generates a new idea, right? Like maybe that bass line with a 4/4 kick from a different track all of a sudden starts to make sense when you play it live and people are dancing or whatever, So that happens sometimes, and that some of my tracks sort of started like that, where it's a really bad idea or like a very rough sketch, and then I sort of use some of the elements in a different context, and then through that different context I generate a new idea, and that becomes the final track, right? And so I tried that with this as well, but yeah, the dubstep beat is kind of generic, the bass line is fine, the pads, everyone can make them, so nothing really happened in that particular context either. And so this track was kind of doomed. It felt like this is not going to go anywhere. So what I sometimes do when I'm really, really stuck with ideas like that, but I still have, I still feel like the sounds are interesting enough to make something with it, I just go a little step back. So once I have that rough sketch, maybe it should go back to the loop, and maybe I should investigate that loop once more and see if something can change in that loop that can then sort of spin off a whole new idea. So I'll load up that loop for you again, and we'll sort of take a little step back and sort of see what we can do. All right. Share screen again. Okay, so this was my original loop. And I had those pads. And the bass line as well. I think I filtered it a little bit differently. Okay, so what is wrong with this loop? And so if you remember the drum session that we did last month, I kept hammering on about finding sort of space within the beats, right? If you have like a groove, usually the groove is sort of music that interlocks with rhythm, right? And so if you program a beat with kick drums and snares, there's always spaces where you can sort of insert music. And then there's other places where the beat is so busy that you don't want to have any music inserted. And so if you sort of investigate on a sort of deeper level this beat, It's very generic, but it's also very pacey. It does basically the same thing over and over again, every single bar, right? And it doesn't have much phrasing either. It's literally just, kick, snare, and then the sort of repetitive shakers on the top, but there's no real space to add proper music into it. And so the first thing I did was I just copied sort of the whole drums, all the drum channels, and sort of started moving around some of those snares and kick drums to see if maybe you create more room in that beat, in that groove, to then sort of generate new musical ideas as well. So in this case, I left the kick drum pretty much the same. And the shakers are kind of similar. But then the snares, I started to change them up a little bit. And so what I did is, instead of that sort of very boring, sort of like pacey, 140 half-step tempo, I sort of moved the snares back and forth a little bit so to create more room. So you get something like this. So to compare, exactly the same beat but with a different snare pattern. To it just has like a very, very different feel to the beat, right? It's almost like you're listening to a new track. And so once I sort of started adding the other percussive elements, it starts to slowly sort of transform into a very different type of track. Now, I still had those pads and the bass line laying around as well. So if you play those on the top, you'll see that now it almost feels like there's too much music going on because the beat is now way busier, right? There's more attention that's being pulled towards the sort of beat and towards that snare pattern. And so a lot of the music will now feel like it's a bit much. Same with the bass line. And again, in that sort of drum session from last month, I also talked about how if you have like a very elaborate programmed beat, you want to sort of keep it simple on the music side, or the other way around, where if you have a lot of stuff going on the musical side, you need a much more simplified beat pattern to sort of go along with it, right? Like there has to be some sort of balancing it out. And so in this case, now that I made the beat a little bit more elaborate, I'm gonna have to find simpler music to go along with it. And usually what I do is I refer to more sort of stabby sounds that have a more sort of percussive character to him, rather than having like long drawn strings or bass sounds, right? And so in this case, I'm kind of back to the drawing board. So now that I reprogrammed this whole beat, I'm kind of in a new track, right? And I've sort of forgot about the sort of half-steppy 140 vibes, forgot about grime, forgot about all of that. And now I'm just going to go through my sample folder and sort of throw some stuff at the wall and see if something sticks, if something catches like a nice vibe or makes something sound especially futuristic or interesting. And so what I usually do, I'll just have the loop running, and I sort of drag and drop sounds into the project and sort of see what I like about them. And if I like them, I keep them. And if I hate them, I delete them. So I just sort of very roughly sort of sketch a couple new things just for vibe's sake. See, like that is kind of nice. It gives it like a more sort of spookier kind of feel. There was this other one that I really liked. I think it's this one. Let's see. So I'm just looking for sounds that I like that fit to the beat. And again, you know, just for vibe's sake, I'm trying not to think about how it sounds or like how to EQ it or whatever. Just about, you know, stuff that sort of fits to the vibe of the beat. And when I found this little rave sample, this sort of vocal, this one, I thought, you know, it's kind of cheesy to just use it like that because that's been used a million times. But if I sort of loop it and then sort of change the pitch, I can maybe get two different sort of notes out of it. So you have a higher one like this and a lower one. And then maybe if you sort of turn that down a little bit, you can sort of have like a nice little sort of bed. That's kind of like your main key of the track. And then I can sort of throw some other sounds over the top and sort of see what fits. And again, you know, usually I go for these sort of more stabbier type sounds because those work really well with these elaborate sort of beats. And so, you know, once I sort of hit my stab folder, I found a few interesting ones, added some delay and some echo on it, and got this little thing. So I really like that one. Has a nice, like, you know, nice sort of character to it. Then I added another one and it became kind of like a little bit of a question and answer pattern. And then when I did this, I felt like, okay, maybe there is something here that I can sort of work with and that I can then drag out into a track. So I added the other sounds from my sample folder on the top. Those sounds, and then all the way at the end I found a nice Rhodes chord sound that I really liked, and I thought maybe I could have like a sort of question and answer motif with those two stabs, and then as kind of like a payoff you have this Rhodes type sound. So it sounded like this. And now I have these three sort of elements working together. I mean, they sound bad still, but at least the sort of placement of the sounds are good. And this new beat. And so I thought now I have maybe enough material to drag it out into a rough sketch again and sort of see how that works. So so this sort of musical idea then became a sketch again. Oh yeah, one more problem that I had was that bass line, because that bass line is very sort of mid-rangey and it was taking away a lot of the attention from the beat, and so I had to get rid of that bass line, and instead I chose something a little bit more understated, something with no mid-range and just sub, and it became this kind of drop bass sound. And so I quickly sort of punched in a few notes to just get like a little bit more support on the beat, and those stabs, and sort of in the form of a sub bass line. See, and it's just a very simple drop bass. So just super simple, and you know, I was like, I'll fix that up a little bit later, but I want to just get to another rough sketch just to sort of capture this idea real quick, because I was so happy I was out of that sort of 140 wormhole, and so I turned that into this little sketch. I'll just play you a little bit of it because you know all the elements by now. All right, here we go. Okay, here we go. Oops, not this. So just quickly sort of dragged it out into this sort of longer arrangement where I sort of put those stab sounds and that new bass line in there. Then that sounded a little bit like this. Quickly pull that up. All right. We have a new track. right. So this was my rough sketch, and as you can see, there's a little bit more storytelling already going on. You know, those sort of new beat that I made, and then the sort of new elements that I added to it by just sort of brainstorming and sort of going through my sample folder. That slowly turned into a sort of more cohesive arrangement. So I'll go through this arrangement real quick, which is kind of like my first pass to a sort of basic arrangement. And so let's just sort of start at the beginning right here. One of the sort of pet peeves that I have when I'm sort of listening to a new record is when it starts with just one element, like those sort of techno records that just have a kick drum for the first 30 seconds, or just a hi-hat. Like, I can't deal with it. For me, if you want to sort of set a vibe straight away, from sort of second number one of the track, you want to have a few elements happening at the same time, so you're immediately in my world, right? And so as an intro, I always try to have at least one melodic element and some sort of rhythmic element happening at the same time. Right? Almost immediately you're like, okay, we kind of know what the tempo is, there is some percussive interesting stuff happening, and there is some sort of weird loopy voice thing that we don't know where it's going to go to. Then from there onwards, what I want to do is I want to get to this sort of main section of the track. And the main section of the track in this case is that drop bass line, and at least two of those stab sounds that I came up with in the loop, right? And so similar to how I did it with Vancouver, what I usually do is I copy this main section, this one right here, where it has all the action, and sort of work my way backwards and think about how can I introduce the elements in an interesting way so that it doesn't feel pompous, it doesn't feel very predictable, but still I get to that main section, by sort of introducing everything one at a time. And so in this case, that little stab pattern gave me an idea. These two guys. Because if you have a question and answer motif, where two sounds kind of talk to each other, what you can do is you can just introduce one half of that. So, for instance, just the question or just the answer. And so that kind of teases, and then once those two things sort of start talking to each other in the main section, it kind of falls into place, right? And so in this case, what I did is I had the intro beat, and then I sort of introduced one of the stabs in the track. And then once I introduced those two, that little stab, then I sort of introduced the drop bass and the snares at the same time, because I also am a true believer that you always want to do two things at the same time, right? Because it just gives you a more excited, sort of overwhelming idea of how the arrangement is structured when not every 16 bars just one new element happens. Because if you do that, you add a bongo, and then 16 bars later it's a hi-hat, and then 16 bars after that it's another snare. Like, you start to sort of predict what's coming next, right? It becomes kind of boring. And so if you sort of introduce two elements at the same time, or you take two elements away at the same time, it just feels like the track shifts around a little bit more while you're just playing around with the elements that you have. But it just feels like there's more action in the track. So if you just listen to the transition from this one section to the next section, you'll see what I mean. See, this section feels completely different from the one before that, I hope. And so this is how I sort of introduce these elements. And then what I did was here, sort of have my snares, and then add this extra bleep, and then this question and answer motif sort of comes together in the main section of the track. So that happens right here at 105. And sort of to lead up to that, I gave a little nod to that earlier bass line from way back in that early sketch, and just sort of added one little note just before the drop, just to sort of remind myself of where the track came from. Okay, so now we're in the main section of the track. And as you can see, there's a lot going on the sort of percussive side of things. So all this orange stuff is all different percussive elements. And as you can see throughout the arrangement, I do a lot of alternating. So almost nowhere you can hear all my percussion at the same time. But, you know, I rather have like 16 bars of one thing paired with 16 bars of another, and then I'll switch it to a different channel, etc., etc. So I constantly keep sort of playing around with all these percussive elements, not because I think it's very cool on the dance floor, because frankly, I think most people can't distinguish, you know, whether you're playing shakers or closed hi-hats or rides, right? But it's much more about the sort of dynamic of the track. So even if all the music in the track stays quite similar, which in this case is what's happening, by sort of shifting around all these little percussive elements, you create more dynamics. And so every time you go into a new section of a track, you sort of switch up the percussion as well, kind of like sneakily almost, but it just feels like the track is a little bit different. So for example, if I sort of skip through just all the beats throughout the track, you'll see what I mean. So the intro sounds like this. Main section. Question and answer. Second section. And third section. So they all do something like slightly different, even though the kick and snare pattern is the same all over the track, right? There's no variations in the kicks and snares. And so just by sort of shifting all that percussion around all the time, it just feels, the track feels way more adventurous. And it can also kind of accentuate what's happening on the musical side of things. So in this case, normally, you know, a lot of people tend to add automation and sort of like filtering throughout the track, and everything needs to modulate and stuff. But in this case, you know, my track is really dry when it comes to that. There's no automation whatsoever. It's literally just audio and MIDI files. And just by sort of arranging it in different ways and sort of pairing different elements together, it keeps it exciting, even though there is no sort of giant filter stuff going on, or even delays and reverbs, you know. So it's very, very dry. But you know, like I said, by just sort of alternating and sort of arranging in an interesting way, you can do so much without having to touch any automation at all. So that's kind of how I built this sort of very first half of the track. So once I sort of you know, played around with that question and answer motif, the blue section here, I introduced that Rhodes chord that we talked about earlier, right here. And sort of that section kind of leads me into a breakdown. And that's kind of the sort of big black hole that you see here, where nothing happens anymore. And so we have to talk about breakdowns a little bit. I am very guilty of putting a breakdown in all my tracks. For some reason, when I'm sort of arranging a track and I get to the sort of 2.5-3 minute mark, there's nothing cooler than you know, being very excited about the music that you're making, and you have like a great riff or great bass line or some cool filtering going on, and we want everyone to hear it, and so we just drop out all the beats and everything else and just have, you know, that beautiful filtering going on for 2 minutes, and then drop everything back in, and it's a banger, right? The problem though is that if you do that for every single track, you know, you basically kill the dance, because no one wants to have a breakdown every 2 minutes of the track. And I started noticing when I started to play my live set, you know, my live set had I think 15 of my tracks in an hour. And I noticed that out of the 15 tracks, 12 of them had breakdowns. And so, you know, it was literally just 1 minute of action and a breakdown, and 2 minutes of action, breakdown, you know. And so after a while, I got so sick and tired of breakdowns. The second reason was that when I'm DJing, if you sort of think about the tracks that you always get back to, like the tracks that save you from any hairy situation in any club, you know, when things go bad or you take like the wrong direction and no one's following you, what are the tracks that you play to sort of get you back on the good side, right? They're almost always tracks that are like very sort of tooly, very loopy, no breakdowns, no big tracks, but usually just grooves, right? Like very sort of simple, straightforward grooves that sort of get you back on track. Like my sort of favorite records when I used to play lots of vinyl was like tracks by Mr. G or by you know, people like that, like Mr. G or Mike Huckabee, you know, very, very simple 10-minute long house grooves that just did the job. And, you know, I got myself into like a lot of trouble with some very complicated track that no one liked and no one could dance to the beat. And then I could just sort of like mix this Mike Huckabee track and sort of groove my way out of it, right? And so once I started thinking about that, like none of those records ever had breakdowns because they were just built for the groove, right? And there is something to say for if you want to make tracks that have a little bit of longevity, that you know, will do more than just 2 weeks of damage as a sort of big banger, but something that people can play for a very long time without getting bored of it. Usually it's those kind of tracks that are just perfect grooves, but with not much action going on sort of inside the arrangement, right? And so this was two of the reasons why I started to be a little bit wary of building breakdowns into every single one of my tracks. There has to be a good reason why you want to do a breakdown. And, you know, most of the time the track benefits way more from just grooving it out and just building a super solid arrangement around that, rather than trying to sort of shoehorn some sort of moment into everything, right? So having said that, in this case, I was like, okay, there's a couple of reasons why you could do a breakdown. One would be if you have a perfect sound that you want to showcase. For example, in like a 303 acid track or whatever, and you're just going crazy on the filtering and you have all these cool stuff going on and you want to have a little moment for yourself where you can sort of show off all your filtering skills in the track before the beat drops back. But another reason could be if you want to introduce something completely new, like something that's in the track that we've not heard so far, but really is like a new thing. And there used to be this really great Joy Orbison track, I can't remember the name, and it had like some sort of speech about cocaine. I don't know if you remember that track. This was like from a while back. And the whole track up to that point had no speeches whatsoever. Oh, Sicko Cell, that's it, yeah. And so the track was 4 minutes long, no voices in it whatsoever. It was just a completely normal track, and then the track would sort of break down and it'd be this giant speech about cocaine, you know. And not that I'm sort of propagating cocaine use, but that is one of those moments where I was like, okay, this warrants a breakdown because this is such a new element that, you know, this is why it has to be quiet. So you introduce that new element and all of a sudden it sort of pulls the whole track to a new level, right? And so this is a good way to sort of think about breakdowns. Like, do you have what it takes to sort of, you know, warrant a breakdown, or is it much better for the arrangement to just sort of carry on and sort of groove it out? Okay, so in this case, I started thinking about what can I do in this track that sort of takes it to a different level, and not to a cocaine level, but to something that I like, right? And so in this case, I was playing around with that Rhodes chord, and it was just like you know, it was just like a tiny note, but I thought maybe if I loop it and sort of play around with it and maybe introduce like a new melody or something, then maybe that will sort of lift the track to a higher level, or to like a different level than what we've heard so far. And so once I did that, I started to play around on the keyboard, and this little Rhodes, let me see if I can pull it up real quick. Yeah, so this Rhodes chord, a bit louder. And so I played a couple different notes with it. So I thought maybe I can do something interesting with that. And so in the track, when everything breaks down, I play around with that question and answer motif and then introduce this new Rhodes line. And it sounds like this. And so this new sort of like melody, I guess, brings me into the second section of the track, right? This second section feels very different from the first section, at least in sort of my ears. So if you compare, kind of like this is the awake version and this is like the dreamy version. So I thought that might be a nice way to sort of transition into a second section where I can play around with that Rhodes chord a little bit, then alternate some more percussion, and that will sort of drive me to like a good 5-6 minutes. I'll play you the final version and the final arrangement so we can take a look at how I sort of fine-tuned the arrangement from here. So we are now firmly in sort of, you know, arrangement 1, I guess, is how I always call it. And what I usually do once I'm sort of happy with the way the story is progressing is I want to do one more sort of run through from beginning to end where I start to add like little details and start working a little bit on mix downs and things like that. So let's go and take a quick look. All right. So this is I think what the final bounce was for the track. And again, we've sort of heard the story a lot of times now. Sorry for playing the track over and over again to you. But again, you know, start sort of with my drums and that sort of vocal sound, right? Then build it up and introduce the snares. Main section. Then, as you can see, now there's even more percussive sort of like alternating and switching happening. So you have this main section, section 2 is happening here. And then the third section has that question and answer motif and the Rhodes chord. Then we have our breakdown where that Rhodes chord starts doing something completely different. And then in the second section, as you can see, the Rhodes chord just sort of plays out all the way till the end of the track. I do bring that question and answer motif back one more time. With different percussive elements again, then it slowly sort of works towards an outro. You see, right here. And then it just fades out. And that's the track. Okay, so now that I have that sort of like complete story, you know, the good sort of 5 minutes or whatever this track is, what I usually do is sort of start from the top, you know, second number 1, and just sort of painstakingly work my way bar by bar to sort of improve. And if I would have done some sort of automation or something like that, this would be the moment where I would start to draw in automation or record automation if I do it live. In this case, I didn't do that, but there's always like a few things that I like to do that sort of like almost finished off the track, because just sort of switching from one you know, part of the track to another section of the track is usually kind of boring. And also, like I said, you know, I don't want to be predictable in my arrangements, and so I usually start to add and subtract a few things just to sort of create more dynamics and more excitement when you go throughout the track. So let's go and sort of do that one by one. So here we start with the beats. We already listened to that. The first thing I often do when I sort of work my way through the track is add these little mutes, as you can see here. So that at the end of say a 16 bar, just to sort of take out a few of the instruments like the kick drum or a snare, or maybe a part of the bass, or maybe you want to add another note to the bass. It just usually gives you like a little bit of extra energy when you get into the new section of the track. So for example, in this case, by just sort of taking out that tabla loop and the kick drums, and then sort of bringing them back, it almost feels like the track kind of restarts again. And so whatever you introduce after that mute, it just has a little bit more impact without having to do some crazy riser or, you know, some sort of like explosion or whatever that sort of brings you to the new section of the track. So a much more subtle way to sort of create more energy in the track. And as you can see, that little mute, I do that here, but then I do another one here just before the drop. And then there's another big one over here, for example. And what's also funny about, if you look at the arrangement, is that a lot of these sort of mutes, you know, that sort of like propelling of new energy in the arrangement, usually happens in the first half of the track, but not so much in the second half of the track. And that's because after the second part of the track has started, you want to sort of like work your way kind of like downwards in energy, because what often happens is, if people play it in a DJ set, is they start mixing new material into the old track, right? And so in this sort of second section, especially in the last part of the second section, usually there is already something else playing. And so a lot of these sort of mutes would just sort of disappear in the noise anyway, right? And so oftentimes, and also because I'm lazy, I sort of add all the mutes and all the cool stuff in the first half of the track, and then usually kind of like roll it out in the second part, just because I know that there's most of the time something else already happening, you know, with a new track coming in or whatever. Yeah, so that's another thing to sort of think about, like, don't put your best stuff in the second part of the track most of the time. Just sort of make sure that you tell the proper story in the first half of the track for sure. Okay, so mutes. You can also do the opposite of mutes, which is when you know, you sort of drop out stuff on the one and then sort of bring it back. And I do that a few times here with the kick drums as well. So you get into a new section, but instead of sort of you know, going straight in with all the channels playing at the same time, I just drop out the kick drums and sort of bring them in a little bit later. It gives it like a more sort of like looser feel, where not everything seems to happen like straight on that sort of 16 bar rhythm, but you know, just it makes it a little bit nicer and looser. So that happens here, for example. Just watch the kick drum drop out on the next section. And it's nice because it kind of emphasizes maybe a new musical element that you bring in. So instead of, sort of having that monotonous kick drum sort of punching through the whole track, now you were just sort of like your attention sort of focused on the bass line, for example, and the kick drums sort of like follow a little bit later. Okay, so that's a fun one to also use once every while. So make it all a little bit looser. So not everything has to start and stop right where the grid tells you to do it. Just sort of like move it around a little bit, and you'll see that the tracks feel a lot more natural and a bit more playful as well in the arrangement. Okay. Another like little trick that I use very often, but often goes unheard, is in these sort of percussive, fields. As you can see, I'm a bit of a freak when it comes to percussion. I always want to add more levels and sort of layer stuff and make sure that I have enough to play with that sort of keeps the arrangement interesting and energetic. In this case, what I often do is also use pitch as well. So for example, in this case, I'll sort of solo all the percussion here. So I'm sort of playing with these percussion elements. And sometimes when I don't have enough material to alternate with, I just use pitch. So for example, these shakers here, this one, I just sort of copy that channel and just change the pitch of the shakers to like a little bit higher. And again, it's almost inaudible when you're on the dance floor, obviously, but it just gives it like a slight sort of energy shift where it just feels like you can't notice it, but you still feel like something is changing. So, sometimes you don't even need that many different percussion samples or channels. You just need a few and then you just alternate. I also tried stuff like, for example, modulating hi-hats throughout the track, where you sort of change the decay time or the release time or even the pitch, or you can do so many different things and sort of make everything move a little bit more so it doesn't feel so static. And especially if you use like little 16th notes, it often starts to feel a little bit robotic after 7 minutes of it. And so I rather, sort of give and take a little bit and, change the pitch here and there just to sort of give it more dynamic. So that's also a fun way and a really easy way as well to sort of create like a little bit of a different energy in your track as opposed to tracks from other people that are played before or after you, right? Okay, so pitch in percussion is like a nice little trick that you can use as well. Another thing that I always add kind of at the end of the track is, when I have sort of a basic arrangement, you can often clearly distinguish different sections, right? So we already talked about an intro. When the bass line comes in, then there's this main section with that question and answer motif. Then, we have our breakdown. Obviously, you can kind of like picture already on the grid what the track is going to do and where, right? And so I always want to try and sort of guide the listener into a new part of the track. And so if something major happens in the track, like a new element is introduced, or maybe a whole bunch of elements drop out at the same time or whatever, I want to kind of like introduce it to people. Like, hey, guys, watch out, something is going to happen, and then it happens, right? And so it's a good way to sort of emphasize that you are doing something new in the arrangement. And so a good way to do it is to have like a little arsenal of sounds that don't really add to the musicality of the track, but they are kind of like connecting sounds, like they connect one section of the track with another. In Dutch, they call it verbinding sounds. And so these kind of sounds are really handy to have, in a little patch or in a little folder. Just some cool sort of transitioning stuff. And oftentimes you hear people use like reverse cymbals or, these kind of like slightly percussive sort of woozy sounds that sort of like glue different sections together. And I think I was listening to one here. I think, is it this one? Let's see. Oh no, that was this one. Let me see what else we have. There was a few bopping around here. Oh yeah, this one maybe. So just that little glassy. It doesn't really do anything for the music, but if you sort of hear it in the track and it sits just before a new section happens, it's kind of like an introduction or like a little alarm bell that says, hey, something new is coming up. I think there's another one over here, like this, some sort of weird data sound. I should have EQ'd that a little bit nicer. And so that one sits just after the drop. But little sounds like that really help to sort of like put like the dots on the I, as they say, right? So once I've sort of worked my way through the entire arrangement, I've done my percussion elements, I've done my mutes, I sort of moved some stuff around so it feels more natural. I add a few of these sort of sounds that like introduce new sections to the track, just to sort of give it a little bit more of an extra. And I must say, once you sort of start doing it, you'll also recognize in other people's tracks that they are doing that too. And I have every time I hear someone, play me a demo or whatever, if I sort of spot those kind of things in the track, it just gives me like an extra level of joy because I know these people have worked their way painstakingly through the arrangement to really like put all the little details in the track, that really sort of help sort of bring it all together at the end. My literally Dutch expressions. You're right. So these are like little details that I love putting in the track. And I sort of, like I said, I just try and work my way from minute 1 all the way to the end. And I know that when I'm sort of at the end of the track, at the very sort of last part of the outro, I am done, because now I've sort of, went through the track several times, first as a rough sketch, then as a sort of storytelling arc, where I sort of build the basic arrangement, then I fine-tune the arrangement, and then I fine-tune the fine-tuning by sort of adding those little details, shuffling the percussion around, etc., etc. And so really, like, when people send me music, I can hear if they had a lot of good times arranging the track or not, or if they had a hard time, because those kind of little details really sort of tell the story of someone that was joyful while making the track. So that's kind of like how all of this works. I am sure there are questions. I saw a few in the chat, so let me just quickly scroll up. All right. Yeah, breakdowns make the listener pay attention. Okay. You mentioned that you sometimes bounce stems from stale tracks in progress and play them out live to perhaps revive them with a new frame of mind. Yeah. What does your live setup look like? Octatrack sequencer setup, triggering clips on Ableton Push or other device? How much improvisation do you like to do in a live scenario? I played a couple different ways. I did use Octatrack for a little while, but wasn't really into it because it just didn't feel very intuitive, I guess is the right word. I also played for a long time on Ableton, which looks really boring, but was actually kind of fun if you sort of make a live session that has a little bit of room for improvisation, but can also stick to your arrangements and your tracks. And so a good way to sort of display new music, like especially if you do a whole new album and to sort of play all these new tracks, is to sort of, put it together in a really well prepared Ableton live set. And then on top you can still freestyle with effects and with other things. So usually and sort of my best ideas come from just jamming on like an APC 40 or a Push, and sort of just punching in loops and sort of try and combine them, use a lot of pitch shifting and things like that to sort of tune everything. And before you know it, and also playing with the tempo a lot as well. So just playing stuff at different tempos to sort of see if something sticks, and if I like something or if I find something interesting, I just bounce it as a new audio file and just drop it in Logic or Ableton and start working from there. Let me see. Denise says, I see you have a different project file for every iteration as well. How important do you think creating a new file altogether is to the process compared to just changing the one you have? So in this case, I think these four, like we have 4 files. So, sort of that bad loop in the beginning, then a sort of a better loop with a basic arrangement, then a proper arrangement, and then the final version. So it's 4 versions. That's not that much, I think, compared to most people. I see people with version 52 sometimes, I usually just like to only save stuff in a new file if it's like a genuine improvement. But for very small stuff, I just keep saving over the top. I also have loads of tracks that just have one file. So there's just no turning back. There's no undoing or whatever. And sometimes that helps me to sort of start improving the track rather than constantly sort of going back to earlier iterations and never getting to the finishing line with it, So sometimes it's kind of good to sort of push yourself, just save it over the top, and then there's just no turning back and you have to move forward every single time. So in this case, I think, 4 versions is kind of normal for me. Some are bigger. It depends a little bit on what kind of track it is as well. Like, so the pretty normal, for me at least, sort of normal dance floor track doesn't need that many versions. But for example, I'm doing a lot with like live instrumentation now and like loads of different stems, for vocals and things like that. And so I'm a little bit more careful with those. And so then I have more versions so that if I do something drastic and it sucks, then I can sort of move back to an earlier version and start from there again, So it depends a little bit on what kind of tune it is and how comfortable I am with the sounds that are in the track. So but normally I try to save over the original file just to move forward. That's really important, I think. Okay, let's see. It feels like the breakthrough in this case was accepting this track didn't have to be a 140 grime track. And once you got out of that aesthetic, things went smoother. That's a very good observation. And I think this happens a lot in music making as well, right? Where you sort of jump into a new idea and that idea is already fixed in your mind. And so you try to sort of realize that idea, even though maybe you're not very good at it, or maybe it's not such a good idea. And so once you sort of, that's also why this sort of live experimentation sometimes helps to kind of break free. Because once you by accident drop in a 4/4 beat from the wrong track, or add a bass line that's out of tune, or something happens by accident that you didn't predict, it could sort of open up a new venue for a new idea. And so again, it's really important that you said that, if once you let go of the sort of original intention of the track and just make what you are making, and be in the moment, then usually the best stuff happens. And I think, to sort of think about balance in music, where, a beat always has to be in balance with the musical idea, or, even in mixdowns, frequencies. Like if you have a lot of low frequencies going on, then you want to find some stuff in the higher frequency levels that sort of complement these things. I'm always looking for like the opposite of what you already have, right? But usually those things sort of help to break free of the original ideas of like, oh, what genre should I be in, or what alias is this going to be? Like all that stuff is kind of nonsense, And so you always want to make sure that you always try and sort of look for these balanced elements in the track. So you build loads of drums. What is the next thing you're gonna have to do is find some music that fits with the drums, And so good point, very good point. Okay. Let me see more. A lot of people also really push the idea of copying the arrangement of tracks that you like, or use that as a jumping off point. What's your take on this? I've never been able to get a good result this way because I feel it limits my creativity. I think the cool thing about copying arrangements is that you can copy everything because no one will ever know that you copied something, right? So I do think that there is a point to at least analyzing what other people are doing in their arrangement and sort of becoming sensitive to how important arrangements really are. It's funny because if you, for example, try and do edits of a track, I did an edit a couple months ago for a burial track, for example, and this burial track is perfect, right? Like no one should touch this track. And so when you sort of start to edit it and make it sort of dance floor friendly, where you sort of make the intro exactly 32 bars so everyone can make a little loop out of it, and then sort of drop the track at the right time, and then sort of add the vocal at the right time. And sort of once you sort of start to put everything like where it should be, if you want to call it that, the track is boring as shit, right? And so why is that? It's because the arrangement, the unusual arrangement in the original track, is what makes the track so good, right? And so very, very often when you look at your favorite tracks, there's always something happening in those tracks that is out of the ordinary, It could be that, maybe there's like a beautiful sort of tension build of like 5 minutes before something happens. Like that's not usual in a track. No YouTube video is ever going to explain to you that that's the way to make the best tech house, right? And so these are things, in arrangement that sort of set your track apart from someone else's, right? And so I do think that there is value to analyzing like what your favorite stuff, not just any stuff, but only the best stuff, and what that does in an arrangement. And sort of not necessarily copy that, but at least be aware of it and think about, how can I do something radical in my track that sort of sets it apart from everyone else. There's a really cool track that one of my favorite tracks is by Galaxy to Galaxy. It's like a Underground Resistance, and the track's called Timeline, and it's basically an ordinary house track, but then in the middle of the track is 30 seconds where it's just the kick drum and the snare and nothing else. Like all the music just drops out and it's just 30 seconds of just the beat, and then everything comes back. And it's such a simple idea, but there's almost no house tracks that do that, right? Where just in the middle you just have the beat. And so if you play that track on the dance floor, that section where nothing happens is the biggest section of the night, And so these are really good sort of examples of like what arrangement can do, like what the power of an arrangement is in the track. Even if the track is kind of ordinary, but if you just arrange it properly, then you have a banger, So for sure, if you have like your favorite tracks, just put them on the grid. Make like little cuts where all the sections are, so you get like a little bit of an overview of what the track, how it's built. And it'll definitely sort of help you, make more interesting arrangements yourself, for sure. So, let me see, Galaxy to Galaxy Timeline. Yeah, super cool track. All right, any more questions before we head out and go arrange something? All good? Yeah, nice. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. I know it was a lot, and I rambled for a very long time. But some food for thought, I hope. Next month we're going to be tackling another fun subject, mixdowns. we're gonna have to talk about mixdowns. This is one of the sort of tougher ones, but definitely a good one to discuss, especially now that we have banging arrangements. So I'll see you next month for some tech sessions. And if there's any questions in the meantime, I'm always available on Discord, so just DM me. If you have tunes with good arrangements, I would love to hear them, or drop them in the work in progress folder in Discord as well. And otherwise, I will see you next month. Oh, there's also a deeper dive in 2 weeks with Titonton Duvante. Talk about really good arrangements. This is a master of, sort of Midwest techno. Also excellent arranger. So if you want to join me for that, then by all means, see you in 2 weeks. All right. Have a good one, guys. Bye.